I still remember the exact moment everything shifted inside me. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in our small Atlanta kitchen, the kind of evening where the world outside felt distant and unimportant. I pushed my wooden kitchen chair back with a sharp scrape against the tiled floor. My heart was hammering so violently against my ribs that I genuinely thought it might crack, them open and spill out onto the table. The only light came from the laptop screen in front of me, bathing my face in that cold, pale blue glow that makes everything look slightly unreal. The silence pressed in from all sides, thick, almost suffocating. No radio playing softly in the background, no television murmuring from the living room, no little footsteps of Mason running around. Just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the confirmation page staring back at me like a promise I wasn't entirely sure I could keep. 2 plane tickets, round trip, Key West. 2 passengers, Juliet Green and Mason Green, age 8. I stared at the names for a long moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. The little arrow trembled slightly. Then I clicked Confirm Booking. The E sound of that single click echoed in my ears like a gunshot. In an empty room. It's over, Juliet. 3 years. 3 long, exhausting years of living in the shadows of what used to be. 3 years since the day Ryan Green, my husband, Mason's father, was officially declared dead. There had been no body to bury, just a police report, a coroner's hasty conclusion, and a death certificate delivered by a kind but exhausted-looking official who had clearly delivered this kind of news too many times. He had the practiced expression of sympathy down to an art form, head slightly tilted, eyes soft but distant, voice low and careful. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Green. I had stood in this very kitchen that day." Mason clutched against my chest like a shield. He was only 5 then, small enough that his head still fit perfectly under my chin. Ryan's co-worker, a nervous red-eyed man named Paul, had called to tell me the news because no one else had the courage. His voice cracked on every other word. "He's gone, Juliet. The accident. They said there's no chance. I'm so sorry." The phone slipped from my hand. I sank to my knees right there on the cold tile, Mason still in my arms. He didn't understand why Mommy was crying so hard, why her body was shaking like it might break apart. He just patted my back with his tiny hand and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy. Daddy will come back soon." But Daddy didn't come back. Not then, not ever. From that moment, I became someone else. Not Juliet the wife. Not Juliet, the hopeful young analyst who once believed in forever. I became Juliet the survivor. Juliet the single mother. Juliet the ghost drifting through days that felt endless. I had loved Ryan with everything I had. That kind of fierce, all-consuming love that makes you forgive things you never thought you would. The constant business trips. The late-night phone calls he took in another room. The way his voice grew colder over time, like he was slowly withdrawing from me even. When he was sitting right next to me at the dinner table, he always said it was temporary. "Just a phase, babe. One more big deal and things will slow down. We'll have more time. I promise." I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative, admitting that the man I loved was drifting away, was too painful to face. Then he vanished. At first, I told myself it was just another forgotten itinerary. Ryan was terrible at communicating travel plans sometimes. I'd get angry, we'd argue over the phone. I'd cry, and then I'd forgive him when he walked through the door with flowers and that crooked smile that always melted me. But this time, the phone went straight to voicemail. Day after day, 3 full days of silence. I kept telling Mason, "Daddy's busy with work, sweetheart. He'll call soon." I said it so many times I almost believed it myself. But deep inside, something dark and cold began twisting in my stomach. On the 4th day, the call came. A snowmobile accident in the Colorado Rockies. Thin ice on a frozen lake. A sudden crack. Strong current underneath. Body never recovered. Divers searched for days but found nothing. The official story was clean, tragic, final. I remember holding the phone in one shaking hand while the other shielded Mason's confused little face. He was playing on the floor with his toy cars, looking up at me with those big, innocent eyes. I couldn't speak. I just collapsed onto the couch, pulling him into my lap, rocking him back and forth as silent sobs tore through me. A week later, the death certificate arrived in the mail. Plain white envelope. Stark black letters. Ryan Green, deceased. I buried an empty urn in the small family plot outside Atlanta. There were flowers, a few co-workers, some distant relatives, No body, no closure. Just a hole in the ground and a silence that swallowed everything. After that, I built walls. High ones, impenetrable ones. I told myself it was to protect Mason, but really, it was to protect me. I couldn't afford to feel that kind of pain again. I sold my wedding ring to pay down part of the mortgage. The diamond caught the light one last time as the pawnshop owner handed me the cash. I didn't cry. I just walked out and deposited every dollar. I took a full-time position at the local bank branch, same one where Ryan and I had first met years earlier. Ironic, maybe. But it was steady, predictable, safe. Every waking minute was dedicated to filling the void I saw in Mason's eyes. He didn't ask about his dad often, but when he did, each question felt like a fresh wound. Where's Daddy now, Mom? In heaven, sweetheart, watching over us. Will he come back? No, honey. But he loved you so much. I said those words so many times they started tasting like ash in my mouth. Then came today. The tickets. Key West. Not just a vacation, a declaration. A promise to myself that I would stop merely surviving. That I would try, really try, to live again. To smile without forcing it. To teach Mason that life isn't defined only by what we've lost. I closed the laptop with a soft click and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in years, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It felt like releasing a weight that had been crushing my chest since the day. Ryan disappeared. Mason came running in from the living room at that exact moment, his bare feet slapping against the floor. His smile was enormous, bright enough to light up the entire dim kitchen. Beach, Mom? You said beach. He launched himself into my arms, hugging me so tightly I could feel his little heartbeat against mine. You'll be happier there, right, Mom? He whispered against my shoulder. I froze. The question caught me off guard. How do you answer that when you're not even sure yourself? I kissed the top of his head. Maybe, sweetheart, maybe. But deep down, one thing felt certain. This was the beginning of something new. Whether it would be good or painful, I didn't know yet. But it was something. I spent the next few days preparing like a woman on a mission. Packing Mason's favorite shorts, his baseball cap with the frayed brim, his collection of plastic dinosaurs that he refused to leave. Behind, sunscreen, beach towels, snacks for the plane, headphones so he could watch cartoons during takeoff. Every item I folded into the suitcase felt like a small act of defiance against the grief that had defined me for so long. On the morning of our flight, Mason woke before the sun. He bounced around the house like it was Christmas morning, dragging his little blue suitcase behind him. It rattled against the hardwood floors as he shouted, "Key West, here we come!" His joy was infectious. For the first time in years, a genuine spark of excitement flickered inside me. Small, fragile, but real. While he hunted for his sunglasses, I checked everything for the 5th time. Boarding passes, passports, IDs, the hotel confirmation. My hands shook slightly as I zipped the bag. What if this was just running away? What if I was trying to outrun a pain that would follow me no matter where I went? I shook my head hard. No, not today. Today was for possibility. In the Uber to the airport, Mason rested his head on my shoulder, already half asleep despite his earlier energy. Do you think they have popsicles there, Mom? He mumbled. I smiled softly and stroked his hair. Of course, baby. Mango, cherry, whatever kind you want. I turned to watch the city wake up outside the window. Juice stands rolling open, school buses rumbling by, people starting their ordinary days. For 3 years, it felt like the world had moved on without me. But this time, I was choosing to move with it. The airport was the usual chaos, long security lines, garbled announcements, travelers juggling coffee cups and luggage. Mason never let go of my hand. His small fingers gripped mine tightly, part nerves, part excitement. Are we going to fly soon? He asked as we placed our backpacks on the conveyor belt. Almost, sweetheart, I said, squeezing back. As we approached the gate, a strange sensation washed over me. Not quite sadness, not quite happiness. It was something in between, like my soul was stretching, reaching toward an unfamiliar place, trying to remember what it felt like to live without constant fear. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go home, to lock the door and hide inside my familiar routines forever. But another part, the quieter, stronger part, whispered that it was time. We deserved more than survival. Mason pressed his nose against the terminal window. Look, Mom, you can see the ocean from the sky, right? I nodded, throat tight. Yes, honey. From up there, everything looks clearer, even the hard decisions. When boarding began, I took one last deep breath. adjusted the strap of my carry-on, and took Mason's hand. This wasn't just a trip. It was a leap, and as our shadows merged together down the boarding tunnel, heading toward salt air and open water, I allowed myself to believe, just for a moment, that we might actually land somewhere safe. The plane was one of those older models, narrow aisles, slightly worn seats, the faint smell of recycled air and coffee that had been brewed hours earlier. Most passengers had already settled in, some with noise-canceling headphones, others scrolling on phones, a few trying to sleep before we even left the ground. Mason had claimed the window seat immediately, pressing his nose against the glass like he could will the plane to take off faster. "We're really going, Mom," he whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "We're really doing it." I stroked his soft hair and forced a smile. "We really are, sweetheart." I tried to relax into my middle seat. This trip was supposed to be healing. New memories, sunshine, salt water washing away 3 years of grief. I repeated those words like a mantra while the safety video played on the tiny overhead screens. But my mind kept circling back to the same dark place. The empty urn, the death certificate, the way Mason's face crumpled every time someone asked about his dad at school events. I closed my eyes for a moment, willing the thoughts away. Then Mason tugged on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, voice so quiet I almost missed it over the hum of the engines spooling up. I opened my eyes. "What is it, honey?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed discreetly down the aisle, 2 rows ahead on the right side. "That's Dad." My heart stopped. The word landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of disbelief spread through every part of me. "What did you say?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though my pulse had suddenly become a drum in my ears. Mason's small finger stayed extended, careful not to draw attention. "That man, talking to the lady, that's Dad." I followed his gaze. A man sat sideways in his seat, leaning toward a young blonde woman in the aisle seat beside him. He wore a wide-brimmed straw hat that shadowed most of his face and dark sunglasses, even though we were still inside the plane. From where I sat, I could only see the line of his jaw, the way his shoulders filled out the light linen shirt, the casual rhythm of his hands as he gestured while speaking. Something inside me twisted, sharp, familiar, impossible. "No." I forced a small laugh, the sound brittle even to my own ears. "Sweetheart, you must be mistaken. He just looks a little like him, that's all. Lots of people look alike." But Mason's eyes stayed locked on the man. "Mom, seriously, it's him." I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. People do look alike. Grief plays tricks. Children see what they want to see. I told myself all of these things in the space of 2 seconds. And then the man turned his head, just a fraction, enough for the overhead light to catch the side of his face. There it was. A thin white scar, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Just below the jawline, near the earlobe. I had traced that scar with my fingertips on lazy Sunday mornings. I had kissed it after arguments. I had teased Ryan about it once, calling it his pirate mark, and he had laughed and pulled me closer. My stomach turned to ice. I squeezed Mason's hand so tightly he let out a tiny squeak. "Sorry, baby," I whispered, loosening my grip. It's not him. It can't be." But my voice trembled. He noticed. I forced my eyes back to the window. Outside, the ground crew was still loading bags. Everything looked normal, ordinary, the way the world is supposed to look when your heart isn't trying to claw its way out of your chest. For the rest of boarding, I stole glances. I watched the way the man leaned in to listen to the woman, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, index, middle ring, pinky, pause, repeat. Exactly the way Ryan used to when he was thinking hard about something. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself grief was cruel like that, finding faces in crowds, voices in wind, shadows that wore familiar shapes. But every stolen look chipped away at the certainty I had built over 3 years. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines roared. We taxied, we lifted off. Mason eventually grew tired of staring and turned back to the window, narrating every cloud we passed. I nodded and murmured responses. But most of my attention stayed fixed 2 rows ahead. The woman, blonde, maybe late 20s, pretty in an effortless way, laughed at something he said. He smiled back, that same crooked smile I used to wake up to. I felt sick. Not jealousy. Not exactly. It was something deeper. A betrayal so complete it didn't even have a name yet. When the seatbelt sign finally went off, Mason asked to use the bathroom. I walked him down the aisle, keeping my head down, but I couldn't help it. I looked. Up close, the resemblance was unbearable. The same slight wave in his dark hair, the same way he tilted his head when listening. Even the small silver watch on his left wrist looked familiar. Same model. Ryan had worn every day. Mason came out of the lavatory, wiping his hands on his shorts. He glanced at the man again, then up at me with those big, searching eyes. It really looks like him, Mom. I knelt so we were eye level. I know it does, sweetheart. Sometimes our hearts see what we miss the most. But Daddy isn't here anymore. Remember? He nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in his face. We returned to our seats. The rest of the flight passed in a haze. I barely touched the pretzels the flight attendant offered. I kept my eyes on the seat back in front of me, counting breaths, trying to stay anchored. But every time the man shifted, every time he laughed quietly, every time his hand moved in that familiar pattern, another crack appeared in the wall I had built around my heart. By the time we began our descent into Key West, my hands were clenched so tightly my nails had left crescent marks in my palms. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud. Mason cheered. "We're here! We're really here!" I tried to match his excitement. I really did. We gathered our things. As we shuffled toward the exit, I kept my gaze forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But as we passed his row, the man stood to retrieve something from the overhead bin. For one terrible second, our eyes met through the gap in the crowd. He froze, just for a heartbeat. Then he looked away, as if I were any other stranger. But I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the sudden tension in his jaw, the way his hand tightened on the strap of his bag. He knew exactly who I was. And in that moment, the world tilted again. We stepped off the plane into blinding Florida sunshine. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel and possibility. Mason ran ahead a few steps, arms wide, spinning in circles. "Look, Mom, it's so bright." I forced a smile. It sure is. But inside, everything had gone quiet and cold. Because the man I had mourned for 3 years, the man whose death I had carried like a second skin, was alive. And he was here, in Key West, with another woman. We collected our bags from baggage claim. Mason chattered nonstop about building sandcastles and finding starfish. I nodded, answered when I could. But most of my mind was still on that plane, replaying every detail. The scar, the drumming fingers, the frozen second of eye contact. By the time we reached the hotel shuttle, my legs felt unsteady. The driver was cheerful, pointing out landmarks as we drove along the narrow streets lined with pastel conch, houses and bougainvillea spilling over fences. Mason pressed his face to the window, gasping at every brightly painted bicycle and stray cat. I barely registered any of it. We checked in at a small boutique hotel right on the edge of Duval Street. The receptionist handed us cool mint-scented towels and a welcome packet with restaurant recommendations. Our room was on the 3rd floor, ocean view, just like I'd requested. The moment we stepped inside, Mason ran to the balcony doors. "Mom, you can see the ocean. Look, everything." He bounced from the window to the bed to the TV, already planning his afternoon. I set our bags down and tried to breathe normally. For a few hours, I almost succeeded. We changed into swimsuits. I slathered Mason with sunscreen until he giggled and squirmed. We walked to the beach, a short 5-minute stroll past gift shops and open air, bars playing, Jimmy Buffett. The sand was warm underfoot. The water sparkled turquoise. Mason immediately began digging with the plastic shovel I'd packed, determined to build the tallest castle in the whole world. I sat on a striped towel, knees drawn up, watching him. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest loosened slightly. Almost normal, almost healed. Then night fell. After dinner, fish tacos from a beachside stand, Mason crashed hard. He was asleep within minutes, one arm flung over his stuffed shark, tiny snores filling the quiet room. I couldn't sleep. I stepped onto the balcony barefoot, arms wrapped around myself against the soft night breeze. The ocean whispered below. Hotel lights reflected on the water like scattered stars. I closed my eyes and let the salt air wash over me. Then I heard voices, 2 people, arguing, on the balcony directly below ours. At first it was just murmur, low, frustrated tones. The kind of vacation fight that happens when people are tired and sunburned and drinking too much. Then the man's voice sharpened. "Do you ever care about anything that isn't money?" My blood turned to ice. That cadence, that rhythm, the way he bit off the last word when he was angry. I froze, hands tightening on the railing. Then the woman answered, young, defiant. Don't start with me, Ryan. I told you from the beginning what I wanted. Ryan, my knees buckled. I had to grip the railing to stay upright. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. I crouched slowly, just enough to peer over without being seen. There he was. Broad back, familiar shoulders, white t-shirt clinging slightly from the humidity, shorts, bare feet. No hat, no sunglasses. Ryan Green. The man I had mourned, the man I had buried in an empty urn. Standing one floor below me, alive, angry, arguing with a woman named Camilla. My first instinct was to scream, to run downstairs, to demand answers, to claw at every lie he had ever told me. But I couldn't move. I stayed crouched there, trembling, listening to fragments. It's a 4-star hotel, Camilla. You think this fixes anything? I'm trying. You're always trying when it's too late. I backed away slowly, one hand pressed over my mouth to keep the sob inside. Inside the room, Mason stirred in his sleep and murmured, Mom. I went to him immediately, sat on the edge of the bed, stroked his hair until his breathing evened out again. He sighed, turned onto his side, completely unaware that his entire world had just cracked open. And so had mine. I stood at the window for the rest of the night, staring at the dark ocean, feeling the first cold waves of rage mix with disbelief and something I refused to name. Betrayal. Not just of love, of everything. 3 years of tears. 3 years of pretending to be strong for a little boy who deserved a father. And Ryan had been alive the entire time, building a new life with someone else. That night I didn't cry, but something inside me finally broke open, not to heal, but to burn. Because tomorrow I would decide what came next. And whatever it was, it would not be quiet. That night passed like a fever dream. I didn't sleep more than 20 minutes at a stretch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan's face. First the frozen recognition on the plane. Then the bare, angry version on the balcony below. Then the scar I had once kissed without thinking. My body felt wired, electric with rage and grief, and something uglier that I didn't want to name. By morning, the anger had hardened into resolve. I would not run. I would not hide. I would face him, hear whatever version of the truth he was willing to give, and then decide once and for all what place, if any, he would have in our lives from now on. Mason woke up humming, already talking about the beach and hotcakes and dolphins. I let him chatter while I made coffee in the tiny hotel room pot. My hands were steady now, the tremble gone. I had cried myself empty in the dark hours before dawn. What was left was clarity. We dressed in beach clothes. Mason insisted on wearing his favorite shark t-shirt even though it still smelled faintly of sunscreen from yesterday. I packed a small bag, sunscreen, water, his shovel, and we headed down to the hotel cafe at 10:45 a.m. Ryan was already there. He sat at a corner table near the window, back straight, fingers drumming that same old pattern on the glass tabletop. No hat, no sunglasses, just him, older, thinner in the face, new lines carved around his eyes and mouth. He looked like a man who had carried secrets for 3 years and finally run out of places to hide them. When he saw us, he stood immediately. Mason stopped walking. His small hand tightened in mine. Mom, is that really him? I knelt beside him so we were eye to eye. Yes, honey. That's your dad. Mason didn't run forward. He didn't cry out. He studied Ryan the way he studied a complicated Lego set. Careful, curious, a little afraid it might fall apart if he touched it wrong. Ryan took one step, then stopped, waiting for permission. I gave the smallest nod. Mason walked forward slowly, sneakers squeaking on the tile. When he reached the table, Ryan dropped to one knee so they were the same height. Hey, champ, Ryan said. His voice cracked on the last word. Mason stared at him for a long moment. His lower lip trembled. But you were gone. Mom said you were in heaven. Ryan's eyes filled. He didn't try to hide it. I know, and I'm so sorry. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I was protecting you both, but I only hurt you. I hurt you so bad, and I can't ever take that back. Mason looked at me, then back at Ryan. Are you staying this time? Ryan swallowed hard. If your mom lets me, I want to try. One day at a time. No promises I can't keep. Mason considered this. Then, without another word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Ryan's neck. It was a small, shaky hug, but it was real. Ryan's shoulders shook as he hugged his son back. He buried his face in Mason's hair and whispered something I couldn't hear. When they finally separated, Both of them had wet cheeks. They sat. Ryan ordered hotcakes with extra syrup for Mason. Orange juice, coffee for himself. I ordered nothing. I just watched. Mason started asking questions. Simple ones at first. Where were you? Far away. Different cities. Different names. Why didn't you call? I was scared. Scared I'd make things worse. Did you miss us? Ryan looked straight at Mason. Every single day. More than anything in the world. That answer seemed to satisfy something deep inside Mason. He smiled. Small at first. Then the big, toothy one that lit up rooms. He started telling Ryan everything. His teacher, Mrs. Patel. The goal he scored in soccer last month. The sandcastle that got washed away yesterday, but was going to be even bigger today. Ryan listened like every word was treasure. I sat silent, arms crossed, heart tearing itself in two directions. One part of me wanted to reach across the table and hold my son's joy. The other part wanted to drag Ryan outside and scream until my throat bled. When breakfast ended, Mason looked up at Ryan. Can you come to the beach with us, please? Ryan glanced at me. I took a slow breath. Just for today. The three of us walked to the water's edge. For one strange, fragile hour, it almost felt normal. Ryan and Mason knelt in the wet sand, building towers, digging moats. When the tide rushed in and collapsed half the castle, they laughed, real unguarded laughter. I sat on my towel a few feet away, knees drawn up, watching. Happy for Mason. Shattered for myself. When the sun climbed higher and Mason started yawning, we packed up. On the walk back, Mason slipped his hand into Ryan's, then reached for mine with the other. Mom, maybe he can come home with us. Maybe we can be like before. I didn't answer. I didn't know what the answer was. That night, after Mason fell asleep clutching his stuffed shark, I sat on the balcony with a blanket and cold tea. The waves rolled in steady rhythm below. Everything looked peaceful. Someone tapped softly on the sliding glass door. Ryan. I let him in. He stepped inside carefully, like the room might shatter. It's incredible, he said hoarsely. Mason, he's wonderful. He had to be, I replied. He only had me. Ryan nodded, eyes on the floor. I know, and I'm sorry. I can't give you those years back. But I'm here now. I want to be here. I crossed my arms. You don't get to walk back in and pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. You faked your death. You left us to mourn a ghost while you started over with someone else. He winced. I won't pretend. I'm not asking you to love me again. I know I lost that right forever. I just want to be his dad. Even if it's only a little. Even if I have to earn it every single day for the rest of my life. Silence stretched between us. I studied him, the stranger who used to be my husband. Finally I spoke. If you're going to be in his life, there are rules. Non-negotiable. He nodded quickly. Anything. You call before you visit. You never show up unannounced. You never make promises you can't keep. And if you ever lie to him, again, if you ever disappear again, you will be gone for good. No second chances. Tears slipped down his face. I swear, I won't ruin it again. I turned back to the ocean. I'm not the same woman you left, Ryan. I rebuilt myself without you. Piece by painful piece. And I did it well. You did, he said quietly. You're stronger than I ever was. I had to be. You made it necessary. We didn't speak again. He left with a small nod, closing the balcony door softly behind him. I stayed outside a long time, letting the salt wind dry the tears I hadn't realized were falling. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't tragedy either. It was truth, raw, jagged, incomplete. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Later, when I slipped into bed beside Mason, he stirred and murmured sleepily, Mom, we're happy, right? I kissed his forehead, pressed my lips to his soft hair. Yes, honey. We're happy, and we're going to be okay. For the first time in 3 years, I said it and believed it. And for the first time, I felt it too. The next morning we flew home. Mason slept most of the way, head on my shoulder, shark tucked under his arm. I stared out at the clouds and thought about the man 2 rows ahead, different. Flight this time, different seat. But the same scar, the same drumming fingers. We hadn't said goodbye. There were no dramatic promises. Just a quiet understanding that the door was open, just a crack, and what happened next would depend on what walked through it. When we landed in Atlanta, the air felt different. Colder, familiar, ours. Mason tugged my hand as we walked through the terminal. Mom? Yeah, baby? Can we build a sandcastle in the backyard, even if there's no beach? I smiled, real this time. Yeah, we can do that. And as we stepped outside into the ordinary gray of home, I realized something important. We weren't starting over. We were continuing, stronger, scarred, but together, and that, I thought, was more than I had dared hope for.